Hi there, Molly Wallen here, and this is my flight scenario 4 for Aviation 430. So this week's discussion is on, I've just gone on a recent flight when I experienced a rough running engine. After the flight, it makes me realize that I need to review the one engine inoperative procedures and operations. Fortunately, at the next Flying Club meeting, this topic will be discussed, so this is the perfect refresher to look everything over for the meeting. So just a couple things to quickly talk about before we jump into inoperative procedures. Flying a multi-engine aircraft, we often know that it can be just single pilot. So it's important to understand what single pilot resource management is. That's essentially the art and science of gathering all your resources both on board and outside the aircraft available to the pilot before and during to ensure a successful outcome of the flight. So there are a couple different aspects of single pilot resource management. So first I want to just talk about aeronautical decision making. So it's pretty much just the approach of assessing your risks and stress management. So I actually provided a little guide here on the right hand side to kind of just monitor and identify those risks and hazards and the steps to take for a successful outcome of that. Next we have risk management. For risk management, I personally like to use the PAVE checklist. It encompasses the pilot, the aircraft, the environmental factors, as well as the external pressures. So I can use my I'm Safe checklist for myself. Aircraft, I have my checklist. I can be using that inside before the flight to make sure everything is operative and working, and then just continually monitoring during the flight to make sure that the aircraft is in safe and working order. Environmental factors, I like to get a proper briefing, make sure I've got my weather, I've identified any obstacles, airspace, anything that could be a factor during the flight. And then external pressures, I like to think, is there any important reason that I have to go today? Is there any pressure that I can push this back? Or any, stress that could be related to the external pressures. Task management, essentially, I just want to prioritize my tasks during the flight. You want to do, obviously, the most important item first, and then kind of just put it in order of priority so you don't get overwhelmed or anything like that. Automation management can be as simple and as easy as programming your flight plan into the aircraft before taking off. Just one less thing to do up in the air so that you're not getting overwhelmed and you're monitoring and staying ahead of everything. Our CFIT, our controlled flight into terrain awareness, believe it or not, CFIT happens most often during the day in VMC conditions. So once again, you just want to make sure that you're staying aware, you're monitoring your fuel, your weather, your fatigue, anything that could negatively impact you to not being able to pay attention, which could cause you obviously to run into terrain or anything like that. And then last but not least, we've got situational awareness, which is part of our single pilot resource management. So that's once again just staying ahead, listening to radios, listening to frequencies, and looking for traffic, staying ahead of your fuel, monitoring for weather and everything like that. So now we can go ahead and jump into our V-speeds. Multi-engine aircraft deal with V-speeds that have to do with one engine inoperative operations. So first speed I want to discuss is our VMC, which is our minimum controllable airspeed with one critical engine inoperative. If your aircraft does fall below VMC, you do not have a guarantee of directional control for your aircraft. So your VMC is typically marked with a red line, so you just want to make sure that you're not going near that. With one engine inoperative, you do want to pitch for VYSE. That is going to be marked with the blue line. So most airspeed indicators in your aircraft will have these marks. So pitch for the blue. It's going to be the greatest gain in altitude per unit of time. There is another speed which should be noted if you are taking off. This is your VXSE. So this is to clear any obstacles. It's just slightly slower than your VY, and that's the greatest altitude gain per unit of time. So finally, the last airspeed I would like to mention is your VSSE. So that's your safe single engine speed. So if you are practicing with an instructor your multi-engine failures, you just want to make sure that you're maintaining this speed to maintain your directional control. So if you do lose an engine during flight, there is a critical engine, and so AOPA states that is the engine whose failure most adversely affects performance or handling suddenly fails while the other engine is producing takeoff power. So there are two things that we want to be aware of with losing an engine. That would be your yaw and your roll. This can create control and performance issues for you. The loss of power to one engine eliminates the propeller blast over the wing, and so because this power loss is lost, it negatively affects your lift. And so this causes the aircraft to want to roll towards the inoperative engine. So to counteract that roll, you want to recover by rolling with your ailerons. Yaw is created due to asymmetrical thrust, so to counteract that, you want to use strong rudder force on the opposite rudder to create that directional control. So that's the first thing that you want to worry about when you do lose an engine. Factors affecting VMC. So we have a couple factors that I have mentioned here, such as altitude, weight, CG location, airplane configuration, wind milling propeller, power on the operative engine, and so forth. So just a couple different things. Altitude, that makes us aware of our density altitude. So we know that performance decreases as density altitude does increase. So that means that your VMC will decrease. VMC would be the highest at sea level on a standard temperature day. Another thing to be aware of in terms of weight, the heavier the aircraft, the lower the VMC, so vice versa, the lighter the aircraft, the higher the VMC would be. In terms of your CG location, the more aft the CG, the shorter the distance, the arm for the CG to the rudder. So that means there's going to be less rudder authority, which means that your VMC speed would increase. In terms of airplane configuration, you need to think about flaps as well as gear. So just as the flaps out reduces the VMC, your gear out is going to also help your aircraft keep straight, which is going to reduce the VMC as well. And then just a couple more factors I wanted to discuss. We've got P factor, spiraling slipstream, accelerated slipstream, as well as your torque, which can all be factored in with an inoperative engine. So one engine and operative procedures, these are the 4 things that you need to make sure to do immediately if you do lose your engine. First and foremost, you want to control your aircraft. So to maintain directional control, you need to counteract that yaw and roll from the inoperative engine. You then want to configure your aircraft. So that's when you want to immediately perform that engine failure after takeoff, those memory list items. Once you perform those memory list items, you want to maintain climb for that VYSE that we had mentioned previously. And then finally, once you have performed all of those items, you're maintaining your control, you're maintaining your airspeed, you want to review with your checklist. So here are my references, and I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much.